Trump instilled fear in Havana after the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, made it clear that Raul Castro was not just old news. An old case, but still an active target of the US justice system. And he made it clear that he will bring in the Cuban dictator at any cost, just like he did with the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. This Saturday, May 30, 2026, the news is in the prosecutor's statement. The United States wants to bring Castro to federal court in Miami and will do everything they can to make it happen. The Cuban dictatorship tried to shield Raul as the eternal symbol of the revolution, while the island sinks into blackouts, food shortages, lack of medicine, and fear. Now the old communist leader appears surrounded by criminal charges, diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and contingency plans in the Caribbean. What has changed? Why now? How is Trump tightening the noose? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward, no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. Todd Blanche told Fox News that Washington did not bring the charges just for show. He said that the United States needs Raul Castro to face justice and that the government will act to try to bring him to court. This statement is powerful because it makes the case concrete. The accusation against Castro had already been revealed on May 20, 2026, but the new point is that the prosecutor is now publicly putting his weight and intent behind the case. For Havana, this raises a red flag. For Miami, it reopens a demand that had been stalled for too long. The case involves the attack on aircraft belonging to Brothers to the Rescue, an organization known for helping Cubans who fled the island by sea. In February 1996, 2 unarmed civilian aircraft were shot down by Cuban fighter jets and 4 people died. The American justice system accuses Raul Castro and 5 other individuals connected to the regime of crimes related to this attack. The dictatorship has always tried to treat the episode as a defense of sovereignty, but the American version frames the case as the killing of civilians in international waters and a crime that demands a response. Trump is now using this accusation as part of increased pressure against the Cuban leadership. The White House is not just talking about the past, it's using the past to box in the present. Raul Castro no longer appears just as a retired figure of the revolution. He appears as a defendant in a federal case connected to victims, families, exiles, and the Cuban community in South Florida. The regime wanted to turn the Castro name into a moral shield. Washington is turning that name into a legal problem. Havana reacted as it always does when it loses control of the narrative. Cuban authorities spoke of threat, aggression, and provocation by the United States. But the argument becomes weak when the Cuban people themselves face shortages. The regime complains about external pressure, but maintains internal repression. It complains about Washington, but persecutes opponents. It complains about the American court, but uses its own judicial system against young protesters and defenseless families. The pressure is connected to the recent developments revealed by the American press. Axios reported that the Trump administration is considering the possibility of the Cuban regime collapsing as early as this summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and that American officials have conducted planning exercises for scenarios of instability on the island. It means that Washington does not want to be caught off guard if Cuba plunges into chaos because of blackouts, economic collapse, protests, and infighting within the communist elite itself. Marco Rubio fits into this scenario as one of the central hardline voices against Havana. The view within the Trump administration is that the Cuban dictatorship cannot survive on rhetoric alone. It survives through financial networks, repression, intelligence, military control, and support from authoritarian allies. That's why American pressure is advancing on several fronts at the same time. When Trump tightens this network, the target is not the ordinary Cuban who faces lines, blackouts, and meager wages. The target is the elite that controls hotels, transportation, currency, commerce, and business, while the people bear the weight of the crisis. Blanche's statement also sends a message to those who publicly defend Raul Castro and then try to keep the door open in the United States. The American government has used visa restrictions against people connected to regimes, repression, and support for hostile structures. This changes the visa calculation. It's hard to defend the dictatorship in Havana and treat Miami as a safe haven for family, a business base, or an escape plan. The prosecutor's statement sheds light on those who live in both worlds, anti-American rhetoric on one side, American benefits on the other. The activity in the Caribbean increases the feeling of being surrounded. The American news showed the Southern Command monitoring crisis scenarios and the Trump administration considering responses in case of possible unrest in Cuba. The aircraft carrier USS Nimitz also started being mentioned in this environment of regional pressure. There's no need to turn this into a war movie to understand the message. The White House wants Havana to know it's being watched. If the dictatorship loses internal control, Washington is already studying how to protect American interests, borders, Guantanamo, and the stability of the surrounding area. The Cuban regime feels the blow because its greatest weapon has always been to drag everything out over time. Let victims get tired, let cases die, let the world forget, turn political criminals into respectable old men. Todd Blanche's speech shatters that comfort. When he says he wants Castro to face justice, he warns that old age, propaganda, and diplomatic silence do not erase responsibility. For Trump, maximum pressure doesn't necessarily start with gunfire. It can start with the courts, sanctions, blocked visas, traced funds, and isolation. Trump also separates two things that the left deliberately mixes together. Pressuring the Cuban dictatorship is not attacking the Cuban people. On the contrary, the American government tries to target the leadership, the regime's operators, and the machine that keeps the island trapped. When the regime says that everything is the fault of the United States, it needs to explain why it imprisons opponents, why it controls the press, why it cracks down on protests, and why its allies live better than the population. The next step may come through judicial and diplomatic means. The case in Miami is likely to remain active, with warrants, formal requests, and international pressure. Sanctions are expected to keep targeting financial networks and individuals linked to the Cuban regime. The White House is also expected to maintain contingency plans for an internal crisis on the island, especially if blackouts and food shortages trigger new protests. Blanche's statement does not close the matter. It opens a tougher phase. Raul Castro reaches this moment physically protected by the dictatorship, but politically exposed by the American justice system. Havana can shout, accuse, and try to turn everything into propaganda against Trump. But now there is a public statement from the acting attorney general making it clear that Washington wants Castro in Miami to answer. The Cuban dictatorship knows this is not just news, it's a warning. And when Trump lets this warning circulate along with sanctions, military planning, and diplomatic pressure, the terror doesn't fall on the Cuban people. It falls on the leadership that spent decades believing they would never have to be held accountable. I'm Milson Alvis, an international affairs specialist, and my purpose is to keep you accurately informed every day. The news links are in the video description. Like this video, subscribe, and check the comments at the end to get more involved with the Milson Alvis community.